and welcome to the Westminster Standard, the podcast of Jude 3. I am joined this morning by ruling elder Bebo Elkin, James Elkin, a ruling elder emeritus at First Presbyterian Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Good morning, Bebo. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing fine, Daisy. How are you doing?
We're hanging in there, trying to stay cool. Not sure if the AC is going to keep up with it, but we're making it.
Good for you. Keep trying.
It's probably not as hot there as it is in Jackson, Mississippi, though.
It's been hot.
Yes. Well, Bebo, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? How did you come into the PCA?
I think I was born in the PCA.
That's what I thought. Well, was it the PCA then, or was it the PCUS?
It was. I'm 77 years old next week, Daisy.
Wow.
Born in 1946, Kosciuszko, Mississippi. The PCUS church there. I think I was there most of the time when the door was open. I did say on Sunday in a sermonic effort that yesterday in a sermonic effort at Lake Forest Ranch that I think I may have been born in youth fellowship. Take that in the right way and not the wrong way.
That's right.
But I never got very many stars on the poster board for saying my catechism, but I was there.
And they didn't give participation trophies at that point, did they?
No, there's no trophy for participation. But 10 years later, my parents moved from Kosciuszko to Yazoo City, Mississippi, and it's about the same there. My growing up years were at First Pres in Yazoo City. From there, Belhaven College here in Jackson, Mississippi. Thereafter, Reformed Theological Seminary. Thereafter, graduate work in New England, graduate work in Virginia, graduate work in Florida. As long as my wife was willing to work and support me, I had a great gig going. In the midst of which, though, in 1974, I became sort of the second person in what was going to become RUL. Again,
Okay.
74, the PCA is initiated in late 73. So the campus ministry there was still under the title of Westminster Fellowship, which was the old PCUS name for the campus ministry. And it remained there during our 3-year tenure in Hattiesburg, Mississippi at the University of Southern Mississippi. From there, Tallahassee in an OP church, also doing campus ministry with students while a graduate student. From there back to Hattiesburg, I was headmaster of Presbyterian Christian School for 3 years, which my wife Jan had been very integrally involved in the start of PCS. The driving factor was Reverend Ed Jusley. Mr. Jusley wanted a Christian school, and he got it. And at the end of 2 years, I became double duty, stepping back into what was going to become RUL. At that point, it was RUM, as coordinator for 3 presbyteries in Mississippi. As you know, RUL had its birth, humanly speaking, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Mark Lowry is the person God used to start what was to become RUL, the PCA's campus ministry. So, coordinator, I'm sitting in my office here at Reformed Theological Seminary. I'm not employed by the seminary, pay a little rent, but am delighted to be in proximity to students, because that's always been a goal of what I've been trying to do. So, 82, stepping back into RUF, 83 full-time RUF, and I was in that position until I left in 2011, and at which time, it's simply a matter of history, the whole campus committee, 12 men, 4 from each of 3 presbyteries, and I, 13 of us, resigned at that moment in 2011. The old RUL was superseded by the new RUL. That's a simple statement. And yes, frankly, I liked the old RUF. Ecclesiologically much better, and was committed to Presbytery owning and operating campus ministry, and was forever saying that our office, which was fairly upscale, because it's where we grew up. We ran the intern program for a while, of course, managed the money, managed summer conference, that kind of thing. While Atlanta was burgeoning, but uh, we were committed to the two offices, Jackson and Atlanta, being support services and not supervisory.
Mm.
And so that was a major factor in my estimation in 2011. There were other factors, but that was a major factor. Left in 2011, we created Consulting Services Foundation, 501c3, no fees, trying to do primarily two things. That is, similar to old RUF recruiting days, trying to help students, seminary students, figure out how to pursue a call toward graduation. And it is rather complicated, but it was the kind of thing that I had done, I think, most successfully in previous years with RUF. I taught here at RTS for 20-something years. I taught in St. Louis at Covenant, taught in Charlotte, and I continue to teach one class in Greenville. So we started Consulting Services Foundation, the first rail trying to help seminary students, the second rail trying to help churches and pastors, churches searching for a pastor and pastors who might be looking for a church. And we have dealt with over 100 churches in the meantime, some successfully, some not quite as successfully, of course. But I spend a lot of time on the phone with search committee chairmen, and we try to get to those churches to give some personal evaluation to help know what a fit might be for that church. We deal with standard, ordinary means. That's who we are and where we grew up. We're standard confessionally reformed, and that's what I do going to work every day. As a third little footnote, it has fallen in our lap to try to help small churches without a pastor and or churches between pastors. I monitor a little list of 14 guys, older guys typically, who are out preaching in small churches and churches who are searching for a pastor. We have dealt with churches from the state of Washington and Oregon, California, Texas, Georgia, Boston, Chicago, Edwardsville, Illinois, etc. But primarily Deep South, you might understand. And with the density of PCA churches in the Deep South, yes.
Well, that's where the plurality of them are, anyway.
Yes, that's where the plurality would be, historically, yes. But around the denomination, we're also somewhat involved with ARP, OPC, and right now we're involved with a EPC church also seeking a pastor. So there you have a extenuated biography, everything you ever wanted to know.
That's the thumbnail sketch. So you were a child of the old PCUS, came into the PCA when she was born.
Yes.
So let's see, in '73 you would have been a member at First Pres in Yazoo City. Is that right?
In '73 we were 72, 73. We were back here in Jackson, and if I remember correctly, we were members at First Pres here in Jackson.
First Pres in Jackson.
We had been we were to become members of the OPC Church in '77 in Tallahassee. Calvin Knox Cummings was our pastor.
Wow.
And we were there for 3 years. But yes, Yazoo City, First Church Jackson, Tallahassee, We were, okay, 73, 70, 74, we became members at First Pres in Hattiesburg.
In Hattiesburg. Yeah, that's right.
Hattiesburg for 3 years, then OPC Church, and then back to Hattiesburg and Woodland Presbyterian Church that go around, and now back for all these years at First Pres in Jackson.
Well, let's come and talk about how you came to ministry. So you were at Belhaven College. Who were some of the key influences in your life that led you to discern that call to ministry?
Well, the primary figure would be an older brother, Tom or Tommy Elkin.
Ah.
Some of the old guys would remember him. My brother Tom is 83 years old. I was rather mesmerized by his spiritual presence while he was in late high school. My parents were believers, not strong believers, but they were church, sort of part of that generational attitude and practice. But my brother was a strong influence, so he preceded me 6 years at Belhaven College. But I went to Belhaven College to see him and see all the pretty girls.
Well, it was a girls' school, at least until very recently, wasn't
Well,
it?
yeah, and even in our day, we would say back in those days, we went to BU where the girls, and the boys are too. we were teasing ourselves, I think.
I should hope so. All right. So then you
But,
went from. Go
but there
ahead.
were numerous guys at Belhaven. Belhaven back in those days was sort of a preacher factory, and Columbia was the destination in the late 50s and 60s, prior to RTS's existence.
Right.
But
Right.
I was just people like Wilson Benton, people like Ron Sigenthaler, people like, I could go down the list of a lot of those guys. I was just very much influenced by the Christians that were at Belhaven College. Um, so then from Belhaven, our group simply moved across town, as it were, metaphorically, to go to RKS upon graduating from Belhaven. And there were we had a strong group of classmates at Belhaven, and we had a strong group of professors at Belhaven. It was rather amazing back in that day, but Belhaven was sort of a preacher factory. So, influence, Belhaven College, friends, classmates.
All right, and then you came to Reformed. It was just Reformed Seminary then, right? It wasn't Reformed Theological Seminary Jackson. It was the Reformed Seminary. Who were some of the faculty that were key influences for you at that time?
Well, probably Dr. Smith was number one. Palmer Robertson is right there at number one. The two of them were just dramatically influential. We had majored in Bible and Greek at Belhaven, so we had professors like Wilson Benton there. My brother was teaching Christian education at Belhaven at the time. But Dr. Smith taught us systematic theology, apologetics, and put us on track, in my estimation. Palmer Robertson taught us Christ of the Covenants and other things. Jack Scott, we loved Dr. Scott also. I could list others, but you're hearing what I'm saying, that Dr. Smith, Al Freund, we loved Al Freund. He never left the PCUS, but we loved him very much. Spent a lot of time in his office chatting with him. So big influencers, and consequently teaching at Greenville, which I've been doing, I think, for 20-something years. Dr. Smith and my classmate and buddy, Dr. Piper. Dr. Piper. But Joey and I became friends when we were high school seniors, and that friendship has continued through the decades, and hence the opportunity that I have to teach at Greenville. I teach ethics, and I'm a John Murray guy. I'm a principles of conduct absolutist guy. So, but Dr. Smith had rubbed our noses in ethics also at RTS.
So you graduated. What year did you graduate from RTS? Was that 72?
Nope, 71.
71. Okay, 70. You got through the fast way. It took
Well,
me it took me
it was
4 years. You
easy. You were a little slow.
I am a little slow. Yeah, yeah. So
Back in those days, 3 years was just sort of standard.
okay.
It really was. It was. It was sort of standard.
Yeah. What did you say about Belhaven College at the time? But by the time you get to RTS, that's a man's man. You got to get it done in 3 years, I guess.
Got to get it done. Yeah, and the the internship idea was not even considered at that point.
Okay.
We did summer youth work, that kind of thing, or Joey Piper was a student supply in Chula, Mississippi, while in seminary. But the wives wanted the husbands to get this somewhat behind them.
Get on. Yes, that makes sense. And so from RTS, you went on. Is that when you went straight to Hattiesburg, or did you go to
No, no,
New?
no. We went to New England, to the
That's right.
University of Rhode Island, to study under Dr. William Young, and and uh, and Paul Helm was there. He
Hmm.
was on the Banner board, wrote for the Banner, a philosopher from the University of Liverpool, but went to study under Dr. Young because he and David Hugh Freeman, chairman of the department, were the translators of D'Urville. And I didn't know enough to know that I didn't know enough, but I went to study under Dr. Young concerning Dutch Calvinistic philosophy, meaning D'Urville.
Mm-hmm.
I did not imbibe because there are ramifications that I'm standard, and I thought D'Urville uh, uh, had somewhat missed the mark. But anyway, we spent that year in New England, back in Jackson a year, and then to Union Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, to study church history, PhD program, and my professor, Dr. Smiley, thought he was leaving, so pulled up with the PHM with an emphasis on the Southern Presbyterians.
The what?
The Southern Presbyterians.
Tell us a
The,
little bit about those.
the Southern,
What is that?
the Southern Presbyterians. A master's thesis on how did the Southern Presbyterians who were in 1840 seemingly strongly uh, in favor of the Union become by 1860 not so strongly in favor of the Union after all. So what happened in those 20 years?
That's a rapid shift over 20 years, especially things didn't
Yes,
change as quickly then.
yeah, and I had test cases, R.L. Dabney,
Mm.
Thomas Smythe, B.M. Palmer, and James Henley Thornwell. They were my 4 test cases to see what happened. It was a very interesting year, the most interesting year of any year of study that I ever did.
Oh, I
We
believe
had
it.
a wonderful library at Union Seminary. Uh,
Well, a
Bill,
number of those men were on the faculty at Union
yeah, and
before it moved to Richmond.
yes, uh, but I became even more entrenched, in my estimation, in Southern Presbyterian ecclesiology as a result of that year. Then we were back. That was um, that was 73. I'm getting my years all mixed up. I tell you, I'm getting old. Spent a year there, and then back in Jackson, and then got involved more intensely with what was going to become RUF. Did the 3 years at the University of Southern Mississippi, 74 through 77, and in
And that
70.
was with the Westminster Fellowship.
That's correct.
Okay, so tell me about that. How did you go about doing campus ministry? Was there an existing Westminster Fellowship when you came, or did you have
There
to?
had been several predecessors, and so there was the uh, acceptance of campus ministry, 73 to PCA. Okay. First Pres Jackson left the PCUS. Um, uh, um, Bay Street left the PCS. Westminster Church stayed in, but they continued in a joint effort of campus ministry. And so in our tenure, it was still called WELF, or Westminster Fellowship. Um, and there was collegiality for that effort. Um, but Mark Lowry had preceded us there. I followed Mark around for a while. And he was preceded by others, including one whom you would know, Brister Ware.
Ah,
Brister
yes.
Ware had been a campus minister all the way back in the 50s to Dr. Tom Creer,
Hmm.
who eventually taught at Belhaven College, but there was a history of WF at USM. And so when Mark wanted to come to RTS to do the MDiv, uh, he called up one day and we ended up moving from Richmond to Hattiesburg and did 3 years there. And from that 3 years, we went to Florida State and spent 3 years there. Graduate student again, and working in the OP Church, officially employed by the OP Church, was a teaching assistant at Florida State. From that 3 years, returned to Hattiesburg to be headmaster of PCS for 3 years, the third year of which was double duty with RUF, coming back into RUF at that time.
Well, did you acquire any hobbies, any two-wheeled hobbies along the way?
Forever. I went to first, second, and third grade on the back of my brother's motorcycle.
that's that's
Started
fun.
riding on my own when I was 12. And
Well,
there are several motorcycles in the garage, as you know,
as I know, that's right.
and sailing and motorcycles and cars. Yeah, I've ridden motorcycles all my life.
So, how would you say the PC has changed since '73 to 2023 in the last over the 50 years? I'm interested in your reflections as someone who was there, before the PCA, when she was founded, and where she is now. You were at this latest General Assembly. I think I got to talk to you for about 5 seconds.
Yeah,
Uh,
yes, I had an exhibit, and that's my role at General Assembly, is to have an exhibit and talk with whoever comes by. Uh, but I have to admit that I'm rather startled by the PCA. Uh, the 70s and 80s were a golden age in many ways. RTS, oh, take a look. What's going on with RTS? Whoa. Banner of Truth. Oh, Banner of Truth. Wow. Look what's going on with Banner of Truth. Oh. It was an age, I thought, of increasing awareness in Presbyterian circles of biblical uh, theology. Now you and I will translate that into Reformed theology. And I thought we became much more aware of things like ecclesiology in seminary. And I thought the creation of the PCA was a major step forward. I had attended a number of Presbyterian meetings by that time, and had moved in and around churches, uh, and saw the waywardness of the PCUS. Uh, it can be argued that the PCS begins to make its shift in the 30s and 40s. I get that, and I could quote some of the events, some of the actions taken in the 50s, 40s, late 40s and 50s, and in the 60s. What's happening in the PCUS? Wow. All of a sudden, there's interest in a different seminary, a new seminary, because the men the, the the ones who really were the impetus for RTS sent communications to the established seminaries and asking them of their view of Scripture, and got insufficient answers from the established seminaries. And Sam Patterson, for one, Mr. Pat, said, "We got to do something. We've got to do something." And so RTS is formed, but the denomination continues to brawl. And of course, I'm sitting in probably the most conservative presbytery of the PCA, at least toward the top, and maybe at the top. And it was the old denominations, very conservative presbytery, also Central Mississippi. And so we're heading into a new denomination. Wow, this sounds so good. 70s and 80s, RUF, called RUM back in those days. Wow, campus ministry. We had been satisfied with parachurch, but that satisfaction began to wane a bit, particularly when the product was graduating and seeking out PCA churches. Here is a figure that I quoted yesterday when I was at that camp speaking to the staff at Lake Forest Ranch yesterday. We did an analysis in the early days. How many of our students who are getting involved in RUM are coming from Presbyterian backgrounds? That's a rather broad term. We concluded about 20%. How many upon graduation were looking for PCA churches? We concluded it was impressionistic rather than a sociological evaluation of data, but all the staff concluded that about 80% of our graduates were looking for PCA churches.
That's a great success rate.
And I said yesterday, Mom and Dad were worried about Johnny and Sally off at the Big Bad University, and they come home sort of converted, and they're Christians. Wow. And they're looking for Bible preaching, teaching churches, and they have a better understanding of, incidentally, ecclesiology, which is one of the imprints of RUM. So they moved somewhere, married a college sweetheart. They're looking for a PCA church. They're tenders, morning and evening. How about that? They read the Bible. How about that? They want to be a Christian family. How about that? And churches began noticing that they were getting quality members coming out of RUF. Oh, 70s, 80s. Wow. Oh, wow. All of these things were converging, by which, in my mind, there was a fairly dramatic optimism. Well, the church seems at times to be lured by its cultural context, doesn't it? Mm. And I thought we began seeing some signs of a bit of shifting. And we get into the 21st century. I think we're seeing more shifting culturally. Cultural accretions amidst the church, amidst some presbyteries. I was becoming rather concerned. We had lived through disillusionment in the past. Are we heading into disillusionment? Is that what's going on right now? So yes, I am an ordinary means kind of guy. Yes, I am standard confessional kind of guy. Yes, and that's what, as I said yesterday, that's what I try to preach. That's what I want. I want you to understand Jesus and the Bible the way I understand Jesus and the Bible. This is who we are, what we ought to be, what we ought to do. And so, yeah, I admit too that I was more encouraged by this General Assembly this year. Prior to, I was becoming a bit too disheartened, probably. But I think we saw some very good coming out of this year's General Assembly.
I think I would agree. I think this year's General Assembly, we certainly returned more to our roots ecclesiologically, with some of the changes to the rules of assembly operation related to the Committee of Commissioners and the oversight that they'll give to the permanent committees, which is fitting that at our 50th General Assembly, we start to look back to our roots. That we had some cultural influences and changes in some of those middle years, but it
Yeah.
seems like now that the denomination is coming back to her roots as she enters this new phase, a phase where she's more mature. In many ways, that's the way people are too, isn't it? That in those middle years, you wander, you become infatuated with new things and trends, but when you get older, you start to realize maybe the old paths are well worn for a reason.
Are you quoting the title of J.C. Ryle? One of my
Perhaps.
favorites. One of my favorites. Holiness. One of my favorite books.
Yeah, I quote Bishop Ryle almost every Lord's Day.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
agree with him on everything, but I agree with him on a lot of things.
yes,
And
yes.
I used that book, Holiness, extensively in years gone by.
That's one of the things that we would like to see greater emphasis for the PCA is holiness, and I think some of the amendments to the Book of Church Order that are going to be debated this year and voted on,
Yeah,
whether to be
yeah.
ratified or not, will help us move that in that direction to
Well,
clarify.
I certainly hope so. And that was one of the four major emphases of RUM in the earliest of days.
Holiness.
Yes, I want personal piety, holiness.
Mm.
I wonder uh, if it is the hallmark that it was in the past. Uh, I wonder about that. And I have very little to do with. I left RUF in 2011 unhappily, and uh, I have attempted not to be a critic nor a complimenter or whatever. It was a chapter that was sort of closed with some disappointment, but that's behind us. And
Yes.
God's providence is a straight line, BZ. Did I ever say
Mm.
that to you? Uh,
Look,
I say it, hey, it's a tease, okay? I tease. Seminary student sitting on this couch right here, wondering about a call and how does all this work. And I say, you may not have been the first person your wife thought she was going to marry. And I usually get that kind of reaction.
mm-hmm.
Then I say, you might have been number 14. But isn't it interesting that God's providence is a straight line?
Mm.
We are somewhat wandering back and forth trying to decipher it. But it's fascinating when number 14 is actually number 1.
Mm.
And so we are not disheartened looking at the past. We're confident in God looking at the future.
Amen. Amen. And
His
and
providence is straight. It's a straight line.
it is. In 1973, you saw holiness as one of the emphases, both of the denomination and of the particular ministries of which you were a part. I think the PCA is returning to that emphasis. We can, what would you say were some of the defining characteristics of campus ministry when you were involved in Hattiesburg and Tallahassee?
We were accused of not being evangelistic, that other parachurch groups were evangelistic. We were stoically theological. That
So
really was,
discipleship.
yes, that was not actually the truth in my estimation, but we were theologically founded. We were the church's ministry first to covenant young people. I should say children. I can't really say that, but kind
Not
of
by the time
to,
they're in college, right? Yeah, but
to
they are young
covenant
people.
young people.
Yeah.
And the campus minister was called by presbytery to be something like an assistant pastor of presbytery,
Hmm.
following covenant children off to the subculture called the university or college, running them down, making contacts with them, sending students to make contacts with students, to to invite people into a Christian subculture of the subculture, meaning RUF.
Mm-hmm.
Bible studies, I pled through the decades, the RUF meeting is not worship as such any more than you and I are worshiping right now. And we've tried to say that RUF is not a supplanter of the local church. It is the local church uh, chasing covenant children first and doing evangelism and discipleship. And so, example, Ole Miss will start with 400, 450 students at RUF in the fall. Mississippi State, 400 or whatever. Belhaven, 89, whatever. Uh, Once you start rolling the numbers up, you start saying, and these college students are hearing about justification by grace through faith alone. They're hearing about personal piety. They're hearing about evangelism and missions. They're hearing about normal Christian living. And the campus ministers were encouraged to have the primary goals clearly in their mind. And in theory, all were emphasizing the same concept year to year, not every year the same concept, but the group same concept.
Sure.
And the summer conferences and all that should be emphasizing that concept. And so in theory, there's the producing of a graduate who is pretty well grounded in fundamental areas of Christian faith and Christian living, and hence an appreciation of the church. And upon graduation, they're seeking out Bible preaching and teaching churches, but with a very good percentage looking for PCA churches. What do you think?
That's wonderful. I remember when I was in college up in Pennsylvania, the church of which I was a member invited the local. Well, I don't think it wasn't local. He was from elsewhere in Pennsylvania. I don't know if there were any RUF campus ministries in that presbytery, and so the church was nonetheless committed to supporting
Yeah,
campus ministry, and so they invited. He was maybe at University of Pennsylvania or Penn State or something like that, and he said, we are an outreach of the presbytery to Covenant
absolutely.
College students, Covenant students who are in college, Covenant young adults. And he said, and you know what we do? We don't just send letters to the PCA students who are at the university. We send them to all the PCUS students, too, or PCUSA students, too. And he said a
Okay.
great number of those will come.
Yes,
And
yes.
and they will be discipled and be encouraged in their Christian growth. And that's something to be thankful for.
Mark
Having
Lowry produced the first theory paper and presented it. Well, uh, he shoved me in the room for one of the presentations, and I think I was not well received. but because we were parachurch minded. Well,
hmm
we got Crusade, and I'd worked part time for InterVarsity and blah blah, all this. But Mark's theory paper said that campus ministry can be done in essentially four ways, and one is the local church can do it. One is the denomination can craft its own ministry to students. So. Yes, that is a viable option,
hmm
and RUF is to be an expediter, not a separate entity in and of itself. It is not supplanting the local church. It is the church's ministry to covenant children and evangelism and discipleship, uh, and with a high return of those students into PCA churches. That it was a noble goal. I said yesterday in my little talk to that camp staff, I said, it's our opportunity to set the table. The Westminster Confession, chapter 1, rightly says at the end, it is God's Spirit speaking in and through the Word of God that brings real faith to people, or faith is a saving grace. We can't create it, but we can set the table.
Mm.
And I said, a, like a pastor, we are all agents of Jesus. And a pastor, if he does his job well, has the hardest job on the planet. If he does his job poorly, he has the easiest job on the planet.
Works 1 day a week for an hour, right?
One day. But I said a pastor and campus minister needs, as it were, a lesson plan for everyone with whom he is involved.
Mm.
We're trying to take these people somewhere. We're trying to lead these people somewhere. And I quoted the old acronym that Mark had pulled out of church growth material, university materials in the early 60s, TDOEE. Teach, demonstrate to the students, and pastors to the members. Show them. Teach them, show them. 1 Peter 5, exemplary. Observe them. Evaluate them and encourage them. TDOEE.
Mm.
It is hard to have a lesson plan for everybody, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. Follow me, following Jesus.
Yeah, that should be all of our goal. And I like those models of campus ministry, because RUF seems to be sort of an amalgamation of both the local church and nationally through the presbytery.
When it loses its roots within presbytery, it tends to become a self-surviving entity. And,
Just another parachurch in a bag
it begins
of
to
other
function
parachurches.
in that manner, yes, to my disappointment.
Hmm. But follow me, following Jesus. That's you could do much worse than to have that as your ministry model. Yes. Well, let's as we're coming up on an hour here. Let's talk a little bit more about Consulting Services Foundation. So you and Wayne Herring are the principals, as I understand it, of CSF, and you work with both seminary students and pastors without call on the one hand, and then pulpit committees and sessions on the other.
Yes, yes.
And so if there's a seminary student listening or watching this, and he's in his second year of seminary, and let's say there's usually a 4-year track, what should he be doing now to be getting ready for when he graduates to pursue a call?
Thinking on two levels. One is the seminary classroom. The other is, how do I leap out of here and land somewhere? And this conversation occurs a lot with seminary students. They tend to get into the senior year. I've got a paper to write. I've got a book to read. And I say to the fellow, look, in the spring, your wife is going to look at you and say, honey, where are we going to be next? And you're going to say, oh, yeah, that. Yes, Wayne does work with me. He says he spends about 20% of his time with me. And for me, this is really a fairly, what am I trying to say, time-consuming part-time job. I'm old. Wayne's a month older than I am. We old, but he spends 20% of his time with me. I'm going to should see him in an hour. Wayne also works for the administrative committee. Here's some of the theory behind it. Yes, I was always recruiting, teaching here, Covenant, Charlotte, Greenville. I was always recruiting. So trying to recruit students for future RUF, or trying to help them think through, how do I seek a call? Here's one thing that I say often. There are two calendars. Churches tend to operate on a school calendar. Preachers tend to move, not a rule, but they tend to move at the beginning of the summer. Well, that is a church calendar. I had a good conversation with a South Carolinian preacher yesterday who's been involved in conversation with the church. And Bebo, what happens in the summer? Well, there are vacations in the summer, all kind of things happen, and church search committees tend to kind of throttle it down in the summer. about mid-September, they begin to say, "Oh, we need to get to work again." And about mid-November, they say, "Oh, we've got all these things going on in the church, uh, holiday events, Christmas parties, etc." They become sort of dormant until about the middle of January. They try to crank up again. You get to the middle of January, in our circles, you have only 2 presbytery meetings before June the 1st. Well, that suggests another calendar. And the other calendar is the presbytery calendar. And I use our presbytery as a template.
Would that more people did use Mississippi Valley as a template.
Would it be the case to get to presbytery for the floor examination, either for a man to be ordained or move to a church, whatever? The committee meets 2 months in advance. Okay, May, April, March. To get to committee, the fellow has to have submitted his written views exam or ordination exams to the committee a month in advance so they can be distributed to the committee. Oh, okay, April, March, okay. I'm doing my calendar backwards. uh, to be in contact with the committee chairman, it often takes a month from that congregation voting, wanting to call the man, till his work is in hand by the chairman. It often takes a month. From ground zero, when a church doesn't know a fellow's name, until that congregational meeting, how long does it take? Thankfully, we can do Zoom meetings today. In the olden days, the committee had to travel a lot. I don't like Zoom meetings too much, but they're helpful often. From zero to the congregational meeting, it can easily take 6 months.
Yeah.
Add the months.
That's quick. That's quick. 6 months.
That's quick. And a lot of churches, we're dealing with one church that's been vacant for 2.5 years. But it's easily toward a year event for the Presbytery meeting in May, for the guy to be able to move on site with a commission appointed for the sake of ordination, often in June. Another thing I say is we don't really have placement aid. We don't do that. The denomination receives MDFs, ministerial data forms, and Karen Cook does a good job. Karen gets a phone call from a committee, and she says, "Well, I can send you some ministerial data forms." So she does an initial screening and sends the church 15 or so MDFs. I was on the committee that recommended Ligon at First Church here in Jackson, and he was called. We had, I think it was 17 people on the committee, and we received 126 MDFs initially. Mm-hmm. But there's not a placement service, and seminaries are not. For a while, when Wayne was on staff here, he and Mr. Stanway were trying to help 80 students graduating a year with placement. But we just don't have an organized way to facilitate in that direction. So we're trying to facilitate.
Well, and that's, I think, part of our polity as a grassroots polity. It's not the purpose of the administrative committee in Atlanta to do
That's
that.
correct.
They can help. They can provide some resources. But that's one of the benefits of our polity is that you can go to these different agencies, staffing, foundations, to try to find a good fit for you as a potential minister, as well as for the church. Mm-hmm. And you and Wayne, I think, are helping the denomination move in a more confessional, more historically consistent direction as you connect these churches with like-minded ministers and minister candidates.
The bottom line 3-letter word is the word you just used, and it's fit. Wayne and I think we have a pretty broad contact event for each of us. I traveled with RUF as far as Santa Barbara and Savannah. Went to a lot of Presbyterian meetings. uh, taught in the seminaries, a lot of seminary student contacts. Wayne was executive pastor in two rather large churches. Um, was pastor of three others, a couple of church plants. 5 years he was on staff here at RTS. It is a truth that Wayne at one point was the president of the PCA. There has,
Oh, careful,
there has,
careful.
there has to be a legal entity with officers. Uh, Wayne works for the administrative committee part-time, calling 400 churches a year trying to raise money for AC. We both have footprints rather, somewhat across the PCA. And so we think with contacts, we can be reasonably helpful to people. Um, and knowing churches or knowing someone who either is on the committee, former pastor, um, people in the presbytery. There are 500, excuse me, how many teaching elders are there in the PCA? Do you know?
I would guess about 6,000.
Well, somewhere, Wayne's telling me now, somewhere around 5,500, maybe a little higher. You're right close. People usually guess, well, what about 300?
300.
No. 550 or so are missionaries, 170, 180 are campus ministers, multi-staff like here at First Pres in Jackson, and guys without calls, etc. 1,775, 1,780 or so congregations, 88 presbyteries, 380,000 or so members. We're actually a fairly small denomination, and we operate on relationships. Who knows whom?
That's right.
That's the way the PCA operates. Who will recommend whom?
Yes, yes. Well, those are good pieces of advice. If folks want to contact you, the website is consultingservicesfoundation.org. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and there's a QR code on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. Well, thank you, Bebo, for spending some time with me this morning, some more time. I know you spent a lot of time with me when I was in Jackson, but thanks
Well,
for your time.
you're not even going to tell the real story, Ryan Beasy. I have the privilege of just calling him Beasy because he lived with us, and
That's right.
he and Ann lived with us.
I think I may still owe you some back rent.
As a matter of fact, that's the reason I consented to this little.
Well, looks like our time has expired. Better kick. Oh, well,
Hey,
thank you so much, Bebo.
we love you. We know we love you.
We love you and are so grateful for you. One thing to close. You said from Sam Patterson.
Yes.
There were concerns about the PCUS, and
Yes.
Sam Patterson's words were, "Go do something."
Yeah,
And
we gotta get doing something.
and I think those words are apt for the PCA now. If you're concerned about the trajectory of the PCA, well, don't just complain about it. Go do something.
Do
Get
something.
involved. If you're concerned about where your church is right now, give a shout out to the men at Consulting Services Foundation. If you're on a pulpit committee, call them. Tell them some of your concerns, and they can help find pastors. They can help equip you with resources to promote a confessional renewal in your congregation. There are resources available from Jude 3 and the PCA as well. But the PCA, as we said in this last General Assembly, took some decisive steps down the old paths, returning to her roots, and we'd like to see that continue. Now, she's been making good progress over the last, I would say, even 5 years. But people, were you in Atlanta in 2018 at that General Assembly?
Yes, I think so.
You remember how hard it was to get that one sentence in the Book of Church Order
Yes,
about
yes,
marriage?
yes, yes, yes.
And here,
Frankly,
5 years later, go ahead.
I was becoming discouraged.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
what? Do what? But I will add this little footnote. I think the younger bunch of ministers are more sound than some of the middle-aged ministers. And so I'm optimistic about that.
Well, Bebo, I think, and you were there, so you can correct me, but I think that's always been the way it was in the PCA. I
Yeah.
mean, when you and Robert Hayes and Joey Pipo were entering ministry, being trained by Palmer Robertson and Morton Smith,
Yeah.
you understood the confession, our system of doctrine, in a much more robust way than some of the men who had come out. They recognized a problem with the PCUS, but they were educated at Columbia and Union, and they didn't have the tools.
They were often strong evangelicals,
Sure.
and they were at times, some of them were four pointers, for the 5 points of Calvinism, but there was an infusion of things like ecclesiology,
Mm.
which had not been strongly emphasized in my estimation.
And so I think, if you're discouraged about the PCA where she is now, look at where she was
Yes.
and look at where she's moving toward. And just in the last 5 years, there has been a rapid shift. And maybe some of that is the culture, some of that is seeing what happens when we start to go down the new paths. But we seem to have, over the last couple of years, run back to the old paths, and that's something to be thankful for.
Yes.
So, if we could rack up this with two things. One from Sam Patterson: go do something.
Go do something.
And one, I don't know if that was you or if that was Mark Lowry, but follow me, following Jesus. Those are two words for the PCA right now. So anything else as we close, Bebo?
No, thanks for what you're trying to do.
Well,
It's the
thanks
Lord's
for.
church, and what a privilege we have to serve in it.
Hi, this is Dabney Beasy. Thanks for listening to my dad's podcast, which is brought to you by Jude 3. Visit the website jude3pca.org, and please come back next week with my dad talks with Pastors Sean Morris and Job Jalumba about the dangers of the pedo communion.